Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the History of Mississippi. Today, we'll be discussing the Mississippian culture. The Mississippian culture is named after the area it originated in, the Mississippi River Valley, of which the state is also named. Now, what is exactly the Mississippian culture? It is a mound-building Native American civilization that flourished in the southeastern and eastern regions of the United States from 800 to 1600, approximately from the end of the Woodland period to European contact. The Mississippi stage is usually divided into three archaeological periods. Just so that we are clear, each period is a distinction that varies with the region. Also, to be clear, the Mississippian period is the chronological stage, while the Mississippian culture refers to the cultural similarities that characterize this society. Anyway, these periods are the early, the middle, and the late Mississippi periods. The early Mississippi period lasted from 1000 to 1200 years ago and had the culture freshly transitioned from the late Woodland period. This meant abandonment of tribal lifestyles for increasing complexities, centralizations, maize agriculture, and sedentism. Major centers were led by regional chiefs. The Middle Mississippian period, which lasts from 1200 to 1400, is often considered the apex of the Mississippian culture. It witnessed the expansion of the great metropolises and ceremonial formations. It also saw the formation of other complex chiefdoms and the spread of the SECC, art and symbolism. SECC being an acronym for Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. This complex is also called the Southern Cult, which is, as far as we know, the belief system of the Mississippians. This cult went through roughly 5 periods. These periods are the developmental cult period, the Southern Cult period, the attentiated cult period, the post-Southern Cult period, and the historic period. Now, this religion, like all religions, is very complex, and I will be doing my best to explain it, but I will recommend further reading in the description down below. The Southern cult imagery focused on cosmology and the supernatural beings that inhabited the cosmos. According to them, the world consisted of 3 layers united by an axis mundi, more commonly called in other religions a world tree, which served as an interesting connection that for some reason a lot of pagan cultures share. The 3 layers are the above or overworld, the middle world, and the beneath or underworld. The above world was the home of the sun, the moon, the thunderbirds, and morning star, the last of which wore human heads for earrings. This place represented order and stability. The middle world, not to be confused with Middle Earth, is where humans lived. The underworld is home to chaos, but unlike most depictions of the underworld, it is a cold, dark home of underwater panthers and the Corn Mother. Due to this view, the ideas of duality and oppositions are deeply ingrained, or are believed to have been deeply ingrained, into its culture. Both the upper and underworld were in constant opposition and strife with one another. In addition to this major belief, there were numerous motifs, of which I'll be discussing a few. The cedar tree was often used to represent the axis mundi, though a striped center pole was also utilized. The petaloid motif denotes celestial individuals, objects, or supernatural beings. The tri-lobed motif may have symbolized a supernatural's ability to travel from the lower world to the upper world. Other symbols were connected to one or the other of the worlds. The Ogi motif may represent caves and appears frequently on underworld deities. It may be derived from the dorsal markings of a copperhead. Underworld beings often have an eye-surrounded motif, while those from the above world have a forked eye motif. Most controversial, however, is the next symbol, the final one we'll be discussing, and that is the swastika. Now, the swastika has a rather bad reputation, understandably, in the Western world due to atrocities of a certain regime I shall not name. However, that particular individual did not invent this symbol. It has been used across the world for non-hateful reasons for thousands of years. In the Southern cult, it represented the creative, generative power of the underworld denizens, which is extremely funny because the Native Americans, not many people know this, but were the first to declare war on Nazi Germany. It's very interesting. Aside from this organized religion, the Mississippian culture developed several new cultural and technological advances. These include chuckney, platform mounds, and the adoption of shell-tempered pottery. Starting with the pottery, earlier woodland pottery vessels tended to have thicker walls, flat or conical bases, and a large amount of either coarse sand or grog as a temper. Mississippian vessels generally possessed thinner walls, obvious white flakes of shell temper, and round-bottom pottery forms. These shells were usually riverine or, more rarely, marine. Now, this shell tempering might not sound all that impressive or distinct, but just 10% can cause clay to be lighter, stronger, and more able to withstand the drying process. This created more efficient utility containers for cooking, particularly the increasing amount of maize, which was caused by agriculture. This, in turn, strengthened population growth and would have encouraged storing of food for harder times. Mound building had existed for over 1,000 years, starting with the Archaic period. However, the Mississippian culture used numerous mounds specifically for platforms. Now, these platforms were for numerous uses, such as the chief's house, public temples, mortuaries, channel houses, earthen lodges, residences, and dance platforms. Many of the mounds became larger with each use. The leftover borrow pits were even filled with water and stocked with fish for future consumption. This really illustrates a level of complexity that had not been achieved previously. The last non-art form common theme with the Mississippian culture is the game of chuckney, which was so popular that it continued to be played after the fall of the Mississippian culture. This game involved rolling disc-shaped stones across the ground and tossing spears in an attempt to land the spears as close to the stopped stone as possible. Often participants would bet everything they owned on the game. Losers might even commit suicide. So this was very serious. It wasn't a game like, other people would just find it, but, To get off that depressing note, the Mississippian culture created amazing artwork. A perfect example are the copper religious plates, which depicted avians and birdmen, and would occasionally have less representative and more geometric designs that might have been used as head crests. The exact purpose of these plates is unknown, though archaeologists do have several theories, such as that they might have possessed religious importance. Another common artwork is the shell gorget. These are carved shell pendants worn around the neck. They are frequently engraved with piercings for rope. Most often these gorgets were made out of lightning whelk shells, though freshwater mussels and conchs were also used. Shell gorgets are most common in the Mississippian and Hopewell traditions, but are found in other regions as well. They are believed to have symbolized status or rank, whether this rank was religious, civic, or military. These gorgets have also been used as amulets of protective magic and medicine. Another type of recurring artwork are long-nosed masks. These masks are often composed of bone, copper, and marine shells. Many archaeologists believe they represent the spiritual being known as Redhorn, which is a cultural hero in some Native American societies. However, this cannot be known for certain as the Mississippians lacked a writing system. There were numerous Mississippian and related cultures, of which 3 are known to have inhabited Mississippi. These were the Middle Mississippian, the South Appalachian Mississippian, and the Plaquemine culture. These regional variations shared traits, but they had their own characteristics, which we'll be discussing now. Let us start with the Middle Mississippian. The term Middle Mississippian is used to describe the core of the classic Mississippian culture area, covering northern Mississippi and Alabama, as well as most of the Mid-South region. Sites in this region often feature large platform mounds for ceremonial purposes, residential huts, as well as ditches. These are often encircled by earthen palisades, which are a type of wall. Being the center of the Mississippian culture, the Mini-Mississippian region was very influential on neighboring societies, with artifacts like their well-carved stone statues being found far outside of their home region. Also, the other cultures would copy their pottery style. Now, they don't really have their own unique characteristics because they're kind of the baseline for which all the others are derived, but they were important nonetheless. To the south dwelled the South Appalachian Mississippians. This region enveloped the eastern edge of Mississippi. It was a late start on having taken the northern influence more than 200 years after that region had developed its Mississippian characteristics. The region features distinct ceramic styles involving surface decoration applied with a carved wooden paddle. Living on riverine floodplains, the villages were often built on mounds with defensive palisades. A famous example would be the Etowah Indian mounds. The next culture is arguably the most interesting. The third and final culture, the Plaquemine culture, was located in Louisiana and the western edge of Mississippi. This culture was a descendant of the Marksville culture I discussed in last episode. Said Marksville culture was a Hopewell culture that later split into a trio of smaller cultures called the Troyville culture, the Baytown culture, and the coastal Troyville culture. This was due to the general Hopewellian collapse that I again discussed last episode. These 3 subsistence cultures later reunified into the Coles Creek culture, which itself was still divided into the proper Coles Creek and the coastal Coles Creek. They were still subsistence despite possessing some complex political institutions, and as such was grounded in the Eastern agricultural complex. As you can tell by the map, the Plaquemine culture was a direct descendant of this culture and did not really expand their overall territory in any meaningful way. The Plaquemine culture was at first a wholly unique culture, but as time went on, the Plaquemine people absorbed more Mississippian influence. Despite this, they possessed numerous unique traits. One of this is their great temples and great sun cabins they built. Another distinctive feature of the Plaquemine culture was their pottery, which was decorated with their own unique designs, such as grass being brushed over the vessels before being fired. They sometimes added small solid handles called lugs, unlike the Mississippian cultures. Potters cut designs into the surface of the wet clay, and even engraved designs on the pots after they were fired. Speaking of being fired, the Plaquemine culture still used grog tempering as opposed to shell tempering that the Mississippians utilized. Descendants of these people include the historic tribes of Tanisha and Natchez. Speaking of modern descendants, the Mississippian culture spawned numerous native nations, such as the Alabama, the Appalachee, Caddos, Chickasaw, Catawba, Choctaw, Gual, Hittichi, Huma, Kansa, Missouri, Mobilian, and the Tunica Biloxi. All can trace their heritage back to the Mississippian culture. The end of the Mississippian culture is marked by the late Mississippi period, which lasted from 1400 to 1540. This time is characterized by increasing warfare, political strife, and population dispersal. Indications of this can be seen as the increase in defensive structures built and a general decrease in collective mound building. Archaeologists theorize that the Little Ice Age, a period that affected global temperature, caused drought and a reduction of maize agriculture. This, combined with deforestation, yes, Native Americans did not live in peace with nature all the time, and overhunting, forced the indigenous people to move away from the major centers. Now, this had happened many times in the past, and it is entirely possible that the people may have reunited in new cultures in the future. However, there was about to be a huge new factor added into it that would radically impact everything. We will be discussing that exchange in the next episode of The History of Mississippi.